Matt D'Ancona, it is 1743. 3 minutes ago, Donald Trump said, "Thank you, God bless America."
He did.
At the end of a quite extraordinary inauguration speech.
Shall we tee things up by sort of playing a passage from the end of the speech?
Yeah.
That will give a flavour of what it was like for those who didn't hear it.
Yeah.
The golden age of America begins right now. From this day forward, our country will flourish and be respected again all over the world. We will be the envy of every nation, and we will not allow ourselves to be taken advantage of any longer. During every single day of the Trump administration, I will very simply put America first.
I guess the headline is, for me, or because we're in the realms of hot take instinct now. We've just heard it. And this was a speech quite different, although very similar in a way to his first speech. And the sentiment was the same, but the delivery, there was a lot more conviction, and
and confidence as well.
He means it now, doesn't he?
I mean, the other big difference with the first speech in 2017 was that that was a resolutely downbeat and apocalyptic speech, the most famous phrase from which was American carnage. Now, there was plenty in this speech that was vindictive, a brutalist, identified enemies, talked about in a very aggressive language about raising America's status. But much more than in 2017, he sort of, has been sort of hinted at in some of the rallies and rhetoric since the election, he's now kind of channeling a kind of techno 21st century version of Reaganism with this, a great moment in American history, revolution of common sense. The best is yet to come. There was a lot of Morning in America in there,
and there were passages of it. I mean, I said to you, do you think J.D. Vance has written chunks of this? Because there were elegies to America, weren't there? There were actually very moving passages about the growth of America through history that he has now co-opted as part of his vision, which would be all fine and well if it wasn't for the utterly terrifying segments about how he sees the future.
I mean, I thought there were some effective sections. You mentioned that. I thought another very effective section was one where he identified his journey, to use a terrible word. He said, "I've learned a lot along the way," and then he grafted that onto the narrative of making the battle to reclaim the republic. I was saved by God to make America great again. There was a lot of God in this speech. Strikingly so, I thought. Now, he has an evangelical base he has to appeal to, but he came back again and again to religion and God, and I think that's something to bear in mind for the future, because there are a lot of people in the new administration, and folks, it is now in place. It is now, by the time you hear this, he will be signing executive orders. It's real. This is no longer
I mean, that's the point, isn't it? It's real. If people were thinking, and there's been a lot of this in recent weeks, that actually what we're going to see is a president who's focused on his legacy, so it'll be more moderate, it'll be more considered, it'll be some of the edges will be polished off. I didn't see, the only polish I saw was in the speech writing and the delivery, which was much, much better and less randomly mad than last time.
Well, I mean, last time it was written by Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller, who is back in the White House, Miller. But I agree with you, and perhaps we'll learn more in the hours and days ahead. But it seemed to me that there were more pens involved in this speech.
Also, I think the fact that it was indoors, surrounded by classical paintings, underneath the rotunda, that all lent it a different kind of vibe as well, didn't it?
I mean, he managed to avoid ranting, which is his one of his default positions. He also managed to avoid going off on tangents about Elon's rockets and so on, which I think was always unlikely. But you could, yes, I agree with you. I think he was restrained by the setting more than he would have been if he'd been outdoors.
Although one of the, just to pick up on that, one of the sort of obvious sort of Kennedy moments was when my jaw dropped when he said, "We'll be planting an American flag on the surface of Mars."
Yeah, I mean, and Elon. We both noticed, Elon Musk
literally punched
leapt
the air
up and punched the air,
and we must talk about the guest list because it was phenomenal.
It was extraordinary, and of course, it was extraordinary in a way that isn't as visible in a outdoors inauguration, because they're much more packed in, and you could see, and lit, and you could see reactions and faces and who stood up at what moment. And you pointed out that it was very noticeable at various moments that the ex-presidents didn't stand up, or some of them did, and then there was a moment when Trump talked about the ceasefire in the Middle East, and Biden sort of lifted Kamala Harris up to her feet.
That's right.
Which was interesting.
Well, I think the ex-president, and apologies, dear listeners, if we veer from topic to topic, because we're literally doing this extempore, and there were moments where the ex-presidents and the first ladies and the vice presidents were the only people in the room not on their feet cheering and clapping. And you said, and I think you're absolutely right, in parts, that was a really bad look.
Yeah.
There were moments where Hillary Clinton, especially when he went on about, today I'll be signing an executive order and the Gulf of Mexico is no more. It will be the Gulf of America.
Beautiful name.
She was literally shaking with laughter in contempt. That's a bad look in any circumstance.
It's a totally irrational response, but this is pageantry and theatre.
Yeah.
And the pictures taken on a day like today go down in the history books. So if you choose to scorn visibly what the newly elected president who won the Electoral College and popular vote, which he didn't, against Hillary in 2016, if you choose publicly visibly to scorn him, you are doing something to your own image. Now, maybe that's what she wants, but it is it's a high risk strategy.
If that is what she wants, then I think she is only serving to confirm all of everybody's worst views of her.
Thinking, there she goes. She hates the deplorables. Yeah. She's just a member of the absolutely irredeemable elite.
Exactly right. She thinks it is worthy of absolute derision, which of course it is. I thought, interestingly, the guy who probably has got the most kind of common touch of those presidents, who's George W. Bush, he was the one
and Clinton.
Clinton had this kind of open-mouthed, almost like he was watching a great musical or something playing out.
I think he probably thinks
what's next? Dancing horses.
What can he do next?
Incredible.
Yeah.
But Bush applauded more than any of the others, and I thought obviously he's a Republican as well, so
a very different kind.
But a very different kind. But I thought Bush showed more political intelligence in his responses than a lot of those ex-presidents.
Well, I mean, I have to say, Bush. I've met Bush, and he has grace.
Yeah.
One can talk about what he did and all that, separate conversation, but he does understand the he's a constitutional president.
Yeah.
He's a pre-2016 president, like Obama and like Clinton, like his father, but which Trump is not. And I thought it was very interesting because there'd been lots of teeing up over the weekend about the 200 executive orders, which, as we say, he is now presumably signing. And he actually went into quite a lot of detail about what those will be under the rubric of the revolution of common sense, which I suspect may not stand the test of time. But anyway, that was the headline. He's going to declare a national emergency at the southern border. That's not a surprise, but it's important because he's going to invoke the act that enables him to deploy troops, and it's very difficult to take that to judicial review. He talked about deportation, and interestingly said he was going to start with criminal aliens. So clearly he's thinking of a phased approach to the mass deportation, but he did make it clear that it's going to be the biggest ever. And
he said, am I wrong he said millions, didn't he?
Yes.
Or did he? I might have said tens of millions.
I mean, he's made it very clear that this is going to dwarf the previous sort of record, which was the nastily named Operation Wetback that Eisenhower implemented, and that's his measure.
Yeah.
So it will be millions. And he has in Tom Holman and others, and Stephen Miller, of course, people who really are committed to this. So, I mean, we were talking throughout this. It obviously means it. This was not the speech of someone who has achieved what he wanted to do, which was to get back, prove his enemies wrong, and is now going to coast,
right,
quietly quitting until 2029. Quite the opposite.
I mean, you picked out George Bush has this innate quality of grace. There was very little grace in that speech, was there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm back, and it took me it was a long and arduous journey to get back, and kind of, aren't you lucky that I am back?
There were moments in it, like, for instance, the passage where he was talking about the Panama Canal, and he started with this again. You picked it up. He's suddenly got this fetish for McKinley, for President McKinley.
Yeah.
And he said McKinley bestowed all the wealth on Teddy Roosevelt, who then went to build the Panama Canal, which was then, we've now foolishly given it away, and we didn't give it to China, we gave it to Panama, and we're going to take it back. You know, that's when he got to the closest he came to a rant. But I mean my God, he meant it.
It is it has been noted in the last few weeks that he suddenly developed this. It was Andrew Jackson, do you remember, before? Yeah. This time round it's William McKinley, which is, to say the least, a fairly eccentric and obscure choice. I mean, McKinley was president for only 4 years, 1897 to 1901, because he was assassinated, which is perhaps not a great precedent, but he did love tariffs, and then he was Teddy Roosevelt took over. But the tariff thing is obviously what's and this, I think, I mean, we'll probably go into greater detail about tariffs in subsequent podcasts, but he is obviously serious about tariffs. I don't think he understands, or he chooses not to understand, that tariffs are almost invariably inflationary if they're on any scale. You can have them as a temporary last resort if some part of your industrial base is under pressure, but he's talking about 10% for everyone and higher tariffs for big traders like China, and maybe even higher. This is global trade war stuff, and it in the end it does lead to serious problems for consumers.
Yes.
But that's where he's at. And there was some quite aggressive. I mean, I was surprised even for Trump to hear him use the phrase "drill, baby, drill" in an inaugural address.
Yeah.
You know, and refer to oil as liquid gold.
That's right.
I mean, this is high, and it's promised again in terms he's going to end the Green New Deal.
That's I mean, forget that. I mean, if your concern's the climate crisis,
this is a disaster.
This is one of the worst days in modern history.
It is, and again, we come back to the "he means it" rubric, which is there is always a tendency, because, you know, on Sunday night he was dancing with the village people, and Kid Rock was at his rally at the Capital One Arena in Washington, and there was an area of, as there always is around him, of entertainment and fun and shtick. There's this terrible gravitational pull towards, he doesn't mean it, but he really does. Yeah. And part of the difficulty of writing and thinking about and talking about Trump is to understand that the different levels on which he operates, you know, that he is a supreme showman. And in his latest iterations, there's a lot more winking Uncle Chuckles to him. You know, he laughs a lot more. But the core of his sort of strategy remains, you know, very dark, very hard right, and implacable. You know, this is a guy who, by his own admission, didn't know what he was doing when he arrived in Washington in 2017. But he's been around a long time now.
We said in a previous podcast, and I really think we were right to say this, is that the hiatus, which now the Biden administration looks little more than a hiatus, in some ways it's been much worse for the world, or our view of the world, that he's had this break, because if he'd have had just a second term, it would have just been a continuation. He wouldn't have had this chance to become as embittered as he is, to think about what he's going to do next time as much as he had, to put around him the kind of dangerous players that he's now got around him, he now is absolutely potent in a way that he wasn't even in his first presidency.
Had he won in 2020, he would have had to deal with all of the difficult, fiddly stuff that Biden dealt with, which was the aftermath of COVID, rebuilding the economy, running the economy hot. There's no way he would have done anything on climate change. There's no way he would have done anything on any of the sort of international alliances. God knows what the withdrawal from Afghanistan was bad enough under Biden. Can you imagine it under Trump?
Yeah.
What would he really have done about Ukraine? Are we sure that Putin wouldn't have invaded? I don't know. Anyway, we'll never know. But yes, in a way, Trump's luckiest break was losing in 2020, because he was then able to fashion a completely new narrative of lawfare persecution, all the court cases, coming back from the wilderness. He went from imposter in his first term to pariah after January the 16th, and now he's sort of this weird far-right populist icon. And I find it deeply terrifying, in not just in relation to Trump, but the way politics works now, that it's only 4 years since January the 6th. I mean, in that very venue, that room, the Capitol Rotunda, where that inauguration was carried out, the most solemn ceremony of the American Republic, just over 4 years ago, there were a violent mob rampaging, looking for Nancy Pelosi and Mike Pence so they could hang them.
Yeah.
And he has managed to turn that on its head and present it as, really no big deal. He talked about the J6 hostages last night, Sunday, and it's clear he intends to give them some sort of clemency.
Yeah.
And really now, most Americans are unbothered by what was, by any, I think, standard definition of the word, an insurrection, an attempt to overturn a democratic election.
Also, there were so many swathes of our life that got covered there and trampled on, one of which was what some would describe as a long period of progress around gender identity. But he has, whatever you think about it, he has stomped on any sort of liberal sense of trying to understand.
This is something we've been sort of wrestling with, isn't it? He, in a sense, he was left an open goal by the Great Awakening in America, which gave a bad name to some of these very important social justice causes, and to a much greater extent than in this country, I think. The backlash was very severe, and so he's basically taking DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion measures out of all federal programming government. He's establishing very, very militant positions on gender. He's taking critical race theory out of everything. Now, there are reasons why he's able to get away with it, and it played very well for him in the election. But you're right. The problem there is that in all of those areas, there was a trajectory that was, in many respects, good. We, of course, take trans, of course, anyone decent, whatever they're, I'm quite gender critical, right?
Yeah.
But I want trans people to have dignity and liberty and to feel safe.
Yeah.
Trump doesn't.
Yeah.
Trump is now, it is fair to say trans activists sometimes overstate the case, but they're not. In this case, they're not. Trump has declared war on trans people, and I feel great sympathy with them today, because if you're a trans American person, you must be feeling truly
alienated
and persecuted and at risk. Because we know, there are already a group of people that are often subject to vilification and bullying and discrimination. The President of the United States has just said, green light.
He's literally said, whatever you are doesn't exist here.
Yeah, you don't,
because there's men, there's women.
There are only two. So whatever you are, that is the erasure that trans people have feared.
Yeah.
And to be fair to them, he has precisely done what they feared that he would.
Yeah, and there will be enormous swathes of people who are very supportive of that.
Yeah, but not. You see,
it shouldn't be one man's dogma, though, should it?
No, I agree with that. But I think that the problem with that particular sort of suite of issues is that, to an extent that I think we were quite surprised by, but it is undoubtedly the case, one of his ugliest campaign lines, which was Kamala Harris is for they, them, Donald Trump is for you, was the biggest hit with independent voters. And I think that, the number of, I say it with some sadness, I think the number of Americans who will rush to the defense of, say, trans people, but not just trans people. I mean, this covers all sorts of areas of liberalization and social justice. I'm not sure how many. I mean, it is very interesting how quiescent America is at the moment, I suppose.
Well, also it's the reduction of the argument, which is of course where the populists play all the time. But when he said, there was a very striking line where he was on that topic, and he said, America will be a society based on meritocracy.
Yes.
Right? Now, okay, great. Who wouldn't argue with that? But the nuance in that word meritocracy runs very deep. If what you're saying is that to have a meritocracy, a prerequisite is that everybody has a fair shake, and to have a fair shake means that you have to equalize disadvantage.
And the problem is that the reason that affirmative action, which by the way is illegal in Britain, but isn't very much not illegal, or wasn't until very recently, Supreme Court judgments have sort of clouded the issue. The reason affirmative action came in, and it was brought in by presidents of both main parties, Johnson and Nixon, was that clearly meritocracy wasn't working.
That's right.
I mean, they didn't do it just to be awkward. Yeah. It was, it's very surprising people were the pioneers of affirmative action, like, believe it or not, and people normally don't, but it's the truth, Donald Rumsfeld, when he was when in his first tour of duty as Defense Secretary, was very, very strong on, I don't like going around the Pentagon and it all being WASPs. I want to see a more diverse face. Now, so my point is that this is decades before the word woke got into the mainstream.
And then in the next sentence or two, he says about Martin Luther King. He has the gall to say, we're going to make your dream come true, Martin Luther King.
Exactly. I mean, he does this, which is to, he's vampiric in his approach to politics. He just lights upon an issue which he has no right to talk about. The Martin Luther King's legacy is about as far from Donald Trump's policies as it's possible to imagine. But he just, because he sees no crash barriers, no boundaries, he storms in there and says, we're gonna finish your dream. He really isn't going to finish the dream. But you're right that opportunism and that lack of restraint and lack of inhibition is something he uses to his advantage. And I think that one has to sort of, whilst reviling all of it really, but, it had power. It had confidence. It was not the speech of a man who feels any longer that he is an imposter.
No, absolutely right, and all the more terrifying for it.
Yes,
because I listened to that speech, and there were parts of it that I thought this is a speech for the ages. Some of this, and it is as powerful in parts as any speech I've heard a US president give, and it will resonate for a long, long time, because not necessarily because of the character of the man delivering it, but the substance of what he was saying. He's moved from the American carnage thing was full of like whimsical kind of this feeling, emotions. This was full of absolute specific substance that he will see through.
Well, I think that what Trump thinks, or intuits anyway, I always hesitate to use thinks with Trump because I think he is a feeling machine, is that he has now, with his comeback, shifted the sort of realm of not the center ground, the common ground, the kind of the direction of travel of global politics in a very significant way.
Right. Listen, let me pause you on that moment, because I think this is the topic for the next part of the podcast to discuss. See you in a moment.
See you in a minute.
Matt, I broke you off as you were talking about the trajectory of global politics.
Yeah.
Now, at this inauguration was Milei from Argentina, Meloni from Italy.
Boris Johnson.
Very
interesting. Rather than Nigel Farage.
Boris Johnson had a really good seat, 4 rows back in, I think, something like that. Nigel Farage in a car park somewhere, wanting to be there.
Yeah.
So, but the impact of what Trump said at that dais will resonate across Western society, won't it?
It will. I mean, I always think that you should sort of hug the cactus and embrace. I know there's a point of view that we shouldn't be self-hating liberals, and I'm not. But I also think that it's not right to avoid the problem. The first thing you have to do when something big like this has happened is apprehend, acknowledge, and take stock of the problem. Yeah. Take its measure. Yeah. And I think it's huge because Trump is now a global figure. I mean, he always was to some extent, but now he is the global leader of a very, very, very successful populist, hard and far right movement that is, if not gaining power, then certainly surging all over the world, including in the UK. And I think that this speech was one that will be studied and emulated for a long time to come.
Now, we in the New European last week, we had Peter Hyman's
a superb
essay on how to fight populists. And also there was a great element of self-flagellation at the beginning that we had got it wrong, and that we were to blame for the rise of the populists.
I think he's right.
I think he's right. You've written an absolute, if I may blow smoke, would you like me to blow smoke?
If you wish. I mean, I always get slightly bashful, but
it's a brilliant, I think it's the best piece you've written for the New European.
Oh, well, that's very kind, thank you.
Well, because it's so authoritative. It's backed up by amazing argument and great sources and lovely historical elements I wasn't aware of. But it's an argument to support the idea that we need to change how we deal with the phenomenon that is embodied by Donald Trump, and that, as Peter Hyman said, is something where we have to adopt some of the characteristics that they have developed and fine-tuned. I
guess there are two elements in this. One is some of the subjects. I specifically am talking about immigration, and I should just underline that I personally am almost an open borders person on immigration, but clearly that's not where the world is. So progressives face a very difficult task in addressing that without simply phonily emulating the right. It is hugely difficult. And as I think we were saying in the last pod we did, until progressives do that, they're not going to get a hearing on anything else. So there's that. But I think there's also a whole question about political methodology, because it is striking to me that there is still, on the liberal stroke progressive side of the street, a view that there's going to be a sort of, as you know, one of my bugbears is the belief in the pendulum, that facts are going to beat all this, and that institutional robustness is going to defeat all this. Yes. And I'm all for facts and active and strong and modernized institutions. Of course I am. But I think it is self-deception, it's delusion to think that the form and methods of politics haven't changed fundamentally.
So to that point, Alistair Campbell, in his weekly diary for the New European,
is this for what issue coming?
Yeah, and discussing the same Hyman.
Oh, good.
Peter Hyman piece. I should say, we've got a lot on it, because it absolutely took fire. The argument about
great
how do we
piece
do
by
this.
Tom Baldwin.
Tom Baldwin's written a superb piece where he's
very good riposte.
Yeah, and also so he's saying, let's beat ourselves up too much, but he does pull slightly at Keir Starmer to say, don't forget the kind of, if you want to call them the graduate class who voted Labour for decades. Don't ignore their interests as well in blind deference to what you think of as the Red Wall, whatever that means. But Alistair, in his diary, brilliant diary as ever, got a text from Neil Kinnock, who is a New European subscriber.
And a great man.
And Neil, Lord Kinnock, I should say, had a problem or a slight bone to pick. Had a slight bone to pick with Peter Hyman's piece. He said, there's one big point he is missing. Almost a decade into the populist surge, not to mention the years in which it was building, its leaders, i.e. the populist surge leaders, are now politicians, not just angry campaigners. They should be attacked and exposed on that basis. You did it to Nigel Farage on Question Time, and he hated it. When Beth Rigby gave Nigel Farage a conventional hard time, he lost his temper. They're hardly ever subjected to challenge about their absurd, quote, policies or ridiculous statements, and they're never blamed for the Brexit catastrophe. We should do all the political adjustments that Peter suggests, but that's only part of the answer now.
Well, I think that's a very, very typically great point by Neil Kinnock. And I think that it implies something which is very important to how to fight back, which is one of the many things we should have learned from the last presidency is that Biden did Trump's work for him by making Trump the main issue of his presidency, and going after him in the courts. And before Biden was president, there was the first impeachment. Then, while he was president, the second impeachment, and actually, it was just before he became president. But my point is that the idea that the answer to Trump is to sort of hound him from office has not worked. And so, to Neil's point, I think he's right to say, okay, Mr. President, what do you got?
Yeah.
All right, you say you're going to do all that. You say you're going to bring great prosperity back. You say you're going to bring order to the migration crisis. You say that you're going to bring technology to a greater level of sophistication in manufacturing, and all these big claims he made today. Okay, let's see it. Now, again, there's another elephant trap down the road, which is Democrats, progressive liberals tend to talk in jargon. So Kamala Harris talked about the opportunity economy, which doesn't mean anything. We all tend to talk about GDP, which doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
We talk about the G7, which doesn't mean anything. What this has to be, to Neil's point, in this country and elsewhere, in America and elsewhere, is what are you doing for the people who voted for you and the people who didn't vote for you? Yeah. It has to be real retail politics.
Yeah.
So that, I mean, Trump has won. That's over in a way. But another point, which is actually very important, and I think was reflected in the urgency of his speech, he's really only got till November 2026 when the midterms happen. At that point, the race to succeed him will start. He is a second-term president, after all. A second-term president only really has 2 years. He's got to get a lot of these things done. In that time, not what Congress and the Senate, the Democrats in the Congress and Senate, and the media and all of the other forces at work should be concentrating on is not just thwarting him or trying to stop him from doing things by impeaching him again. It doesn't work. That presidents never get impeached successfully. It's too difficult. I'm not saying if he does something appalling, he'll have to be impeached, but don't look to impeach him for the smallest thing. Say every day on every podcast, on every social media channel, what has he done for you lately? What is he doing? He said he was going to do X. Here's Y, right? And then the harder part, come up with a better plan.
Yeah, well, so that is the hardest part of all. But I do think also that there are so many partners in these crimes against the truth,
yes,
if you want, and we're complicit in them. And also there's so many, the water is so muddied on social media where you can find whatever supportive view you want. Take the example of Milei in Argentina, right? Now there's a school of thought. In fact, I was reading in the FT this week, Argentina repays its bondholders.
How great it is, yeah.
It's suddenly working. And I thought, my God, really?
Not if you're poor.
That's very interesting. Literally half of Argentina is now living in poverty.
Indigence.
In poverty because of his policies.
Yeah.
And so what's going to happen with Milei is that his best bet is, can he hang on long enough for the mess he's created to unravel on someone else's watch?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's right. And it's weird having sort of been chasing the whole post-truth issue since 2017, little book I wrote about it came out. It's got worse, right? And if I'm honest, I don't see it getting better anytime soon. So another thing I think that Democrats, progressives, etc., have to do is, as much as it's infuriating, just pointing out the fact that the media field is not level.
Yeah.
Is not enough, right? Saying we hate JGB News, we hate Fox, we hate X, God knows what happens if Elon Musk buys TikTok. That'll be fun. That is infuriating and unfair and unjust, but it's not going to change. So you have to build around it. And I think one of the things that Biden was terrible at, he was terrible on social media. He was terrible on podcasts. He barely did any. Harris did a few, but there was a very strong piece by James Carville, who's now 80, Clinton's great guru from 92, saying, I don't get this, he said, but I understand that the next successful Democrat presidential candidate will be someone who is able to speak to people authentically and in a language that can be sold. He didn't mean only in podcasts, but not in the sort of message discipline of the CNN Fox era. That's gone.
And that's why I found this speech today so disturbing. Was that I believe we live in an age where, if not completely, but certainly to a large degree, the best storyteller wins.
But that's absolutely.
And that's why when I look at Keir Starmer, and this is where I had a slight issue with Tom's piece, is that I do think Keir, and Tom acknowledged it, he's got a technocracy about him, and he's kind of he's never going to articulate that vision. And it's so important that we have someone who can. And I can't get over the, if it's not Farage, maybe it's Johnson. It won't be Badenoch. We know Badenoch can't tell a story either. So Keir Starmer's blessed in his opposition, but somebody needs to be able to tell a great story about our side of the fence.
Yes, and here's the thing, is that if you accept that premise, which is it's all about story, which is something that the British centre-left is miles away from. But let's say they've made that leap. There are great stories to tell, which is all about, you always win if you win the future, which is, what are the problems of the 21st century? They are inequality, the fact that people can't get a fair shake anymore for themselves in precarious employment, but also huge issue. The person that starts to resolve this will win forever. The idea that your kids are going to be less well off than you are. That's a new phenomenon, and it's a dangerous one because it walks straight into the populist trap. Climate change, technology, not just talking about AI as if it was something on Doctor Who or a stylophone, but talking about the behavioural, real life. What does this mean for your jobs? How can we help? A government that says, right, we're going to make AI work for you.
That was an extraordinary moment in Trump's speech where he... But it's revealing. It was a bit of a tell when he talked about the fires in LA. And instead of talking about, tens of thousands of homes that got burned down, he actually said some of the richest people in the world whose homes have been burned down, some of them are in here. And so there is, unless we grasp, as you've just said, that the common advantages and the common challenges that these new technologies bring, not just for billionaires, but for people, then we've got a problem.
I mean, to go back to Neil Kinnock's point, one of the things that will definitely happen is that Trump will offer amazing tax breaks to the rich.
Yeah.
Now, the Democrats should be all over that. They should, not on TV, no, not TV ads, but in the public square as it really is now, which is not CNN and Fox, actually, saying these new tax breaks come into force today. Elon Musk will save X, right, which will be a phenomenal amount. You, if you're on this amount, will save a pitiful. You go for the fact that in the end, Trump is a plutocrat and an oligarch, and he conceals that very cleverly by persuading people of limited means or in difficulties that he, quotes, sees them, and that is his genius. How is this guy who has gold-plated taps in his plane managed to persuade the poor of America that he's on their side? And the poor, I might add now, of all races. That is how much this has advanced, right? And part of the reason is that, I can't remember who said this first, but it was a brilliant point, which is the liberal mindset is they look at Trump and they think, oh, he's so vulgar, right? If you're poor, you look at Trump with a series of beautiful wives and an amazing plane with gold taps, and you think, that's exactly what I'd do if I was rich. And because one of our reflexes is to sneer. And sometimes we should sneer. Satire's good, but never forget that what might seem horrifically Philistinic to us looks great if you have nothing.
We both admired Dave Chappelle's brilliant Saturday Night Live monologue. And it is, if you haven't heard
do watch it.
I mean, you'll find the link somewhere. We'll post one in the show notes.
Do listen to it.
But it's 17 minutes, and it's, if you don't know Dave Chappelle, you should do. He's a genius, isn't he?
He's a sort of prophet now. He's a commentator upon modern life.
And but he ends this monologue, brilliant monologue, very moving monologue.
Very moving.
With an appeal to Donald Trump to do better this time, but
and
also
to us,
for
to do
all of us to do better this time.
And that wonderful line, what was it? Displace people from
the Palisades to Palestine. Do better they're all counting on you.
That's vintage Chappelle.
They're all counting on you from the Palisades to Palestine. But I've got to say, I didn't get the sense that Donald Trump was receptive to that kind of appeal, given the nature of the speech we've just heard.
No, but in a sense, what Chappelle has been so good at, he's in spite of all the attempts to cancel him for his various, edgy jokes, he's very much a progressive man. He really is. But what he's said all along about, from the very beginning, actually, back in 2016, he said, I live in Ohio. You've got to understand, I live amongst poor white people. They love Trump, right? I don't. Although I'm going to benefit from his policies because I'm rich. But if you don't understand his appeal, you will never be able to answer him. And I think that implicit in all the things that Chappelle has said over the last 10 years is there is a reproach not only to Trump, but also to Democrats, and progressives generally. It's like, we have to deal with this guy. We have to answer him. And just saying, what a cretin, what a moron, what an idiot, what a bigot. Even if all those things are true, maybe that's necessary, but it is no way sufficient.
Matt, thank you so much. Extraordinary times.
Yeah, and we'll have more. This is only, just to make clear, we were doing this right after the speech, so we'll have more to say.
So later in the week for our next podcast, we'll probably have a more considered, rounded view on life.
And maybe an update.
Right now you've had
update on where we are in the Middle East and so on. Who knows?
Yeah, absolutely. But there's the hot take on the inauguration of Donald Trump, the President of the United States.
He's now president again.
Extraordinary words.
It's amazing to say.
Subscribe to the New European, please. If you want to read all of those great articles I was just referencing, they're all there right now, and you can subscribe from as little as, I think it's about £1.15 a week, due to all of the inflationary pressures we're facing. Used to be £1, now it's £1.15. Still absolutely cheap as chips.
It's the tariffs.
It's the tariffs.
Beautiful tariffs.
Beautiful tariffs. And there's a free gift. I can't remember what the free gift is now. It might be a bottle of tequila.
Is it not the tequila?
Or it might be a Make Europe Great Again hat. I can't remember.
Well, I mean, if ever there was a time to go to the European store and buy yourself
a lovely
Make European Great Again baseball cap, it is today.
Stand up, be seen.
Be seen.
Yeah, be seen. I think that is actually one of the great themes of, if you believe this shit and you want to turn it round, you've got to be seen now. You've got to be seen.
I mean, it's always worth remembering this, that the MAGA hats, which are now sort of almost like a uniform, when they started, and when Ted Cruz unbelievably was the leading candidate, and the Trump people started wearing red baseball caps, it was considered quite brave physically to go to rallies and that's how it starts.
Yeah.
That's how revivals and new movements start. Yeah. Small beginnings starts.
So
start again.
Join our small revival. Subscribe to The New European. Go to theneweuropean.co.uk/2Matts. That's the number 2 MATTS. There's a link in the show notes. Send in your observations, feedback, questions, anything you want to get off your chest to 2Matts@tnepublishing.com. That's the number 2 MATTS at tnepublishing.com. Thank you as ever to our team of producers led by Matt Hill at Rethink Audio. And until Thursday,
have a great week.
Have a great week.
Make your week great again.
Make weeks great again.
Make weeks great again. See ya.